His hands were not shaking. On a spring morning in Jerusalem, in the year we reckon as AD 33, a man knelt over a wooden beam with an iron mallet in his fist and 3 long nails within reach, and his hands were steady because he had done this before. The sun was already warming the pale rock outside the city wall. Somewhere below, the smoke of the Passover fires was climbing over the rooftops, and a crowd was beginning to gather along the road, the way crowds always gathered when the empire had something to show them. He smelled dust and blood, and the sour wine in the flask at his belt. He heard the low murmur of the mob and the sharper sound of a hammer being tested against wood. And then they laid a man down on the beam and stretched out his arm, and the soldier set the point of the first nail against the wrist, and he swung. We do not know his name. That is where this story has to begin, because it is the thing the Gospels refuse to give us. 4 men writing the account of the most examined execution in human history, and not one of them tells us who drove the nails. The man at the very center of the act is a blank, and into that blank, over 20 centuries, people have poured legends and names and whole invented biographies. So we will not invent him. We will stand exactly where he stood, at the foot of the cross, and look only at what the record actually lets us see. Because what that soldier saw in the 6 hours between the 3rd hour and the 9th is the most extraordinary thing any executioner has ever witnessed on the job. And by the end, the question will not be who he was. The question will be how close you are to him. To understand his mourning, you have to understand his world. The man on the ground was Tiberius Caesar. Though he never set foot in Judea, he ruled from the island of Capri, and his face was on the coins that changed hands in the temple courts below. Judea itself was a Roman prefecture, a difficult, resentful province governed by a man named Pontius Pilate. We are not depending on the Gospels alone for Pilate. In 1961, archaeologists working in the ruins of Caesarea on the coast turned over a block of limestone that had been reused in the steps of a theater, and carved into it, still legible after 19 centuries, was his name and his title: Pontius Pilatus, prefect of Judea. He is the only official in the whole Passion narrative whose name we can still read in stone. The high priest that year was Joseph Caiaphas, who had held the office for 18 years by working hand in glove with Rome. And it was Passover. That single fact changes everything about the day. Jerusalem in an ordinary week was a city of tens of thousands. But at Passover it swelled several times over as pilgrims poured in from across the empire. And Rome knew perfectly well that a festival crowd under occupation was the most dangerous thing in the province. So every year, at exactly this feast, the garrison was reinforced, and the executions were public, and the message was deliberate. This is what happens to men who imagine they are kings. The soldiers on duty that morning were not, in all likelihood, Italian legionaries. No Roman legion was permanently stationed in Judea in these years. The men who did the daily work of occupation were auxiliaries, provincials recruited from places like Samaria and Caesarea, non-Jews who despised the people they policed and were despised in return. Which means the man who nailed Jesus of Nazareth to the cross was almost certainly not a Roman by birth at all. He was a local hire doing an imperial job. And the job was terror. Crucifixion was not simply an execution. It was a performance of Roman power, reserved for slaves and rebels, designed to shame and to deter. When Rome meant to crush a revolt, it did not hang one man. Decades before this, after an uprising in Galilee, the governor Varus is remembered to have crucified around 2,000 at once, a line of crosses along the roads into the city. The empire ran crucifixion at scale, and Golgotha was one of the places it did the work. For a long time, much of what we said about its mechanics was educated guesswork, because although the Romans crucified thousands, we had almost no physical remains. Then, in 1968, in a burial cave at a place north of Jerusalem called Giv'at ha-Mivtar, workers uncovered a stone box of bones, and one heel bone had an iron nail still driven through it, bent where it had struck a knot in the olive wood upright and could not be pulled free. A fragment of the wood was still attached. It is, to this day, the clearest physical evidence of a Roman crucifixion ever found, and it corrected our imagination. The nail through that heel was around 11 centimeters long. It went in from the side. This was not the clean, symmetrical image of later art. It was a carpenter's brutal improvisation on a human body, and the man with the mallet knew every practiced angle of it. Picture the man, then, not as a villain, but as a professional. He carried a short sword at his hip, and, on execution duty, a heavy iron mallet and a handful of nails, and those nails were not disposable. Iron was expensive. The nails were pried back out of the wood when the work was done and used again, which is precisely why, centuries later, they would become objects of legend and relic hunting. At his belt hung a flask of Posca, the cheap sour wine that was the ration and the small comfort of the common Roman soldier, the same wine he would lift, in mockery, to a dying man's mouth. He served in an occupying force that was resented in every street it walked, garrisoning a people whose god and customs he did not share and did not respect. Execution was not the exception in his week. It was the trade. He had learned its angles the way a mason learns stone, and he brought to the cross of Jesus of Nazareth nothing more dramatic and nothing more chilling than competence. So hold that picture, because here is what it costs to hold it. This was not a monster. He woke up to a shift, drew the same duty 1,000 mornings had handed him, and did it the way you do a thing you have done too many times to feel. Have you ever done something on ordinary autopilot, following the routine, following the orders, following the path of least resistance, and only understood much later what you had actually been part of? Not a monstrous thing, done by a monster. An ordinary thing, done by an ordinary person on an ordinary day that turned out to be the hinge of everything. Sit with that for a moment. And if there is a memory rising in you right now, I would like you to tell me about it in the comments, because I think it is the most honest doorway into this entire story, and I want to read what you write. Now let us walk the day itself, hour by hour, through his eyes. It began before Golgotha, in the courtyard of the governor's residence. Pilate had passed sentence, and the Gospel of Matthew tells us plainly that Jesus was handed over to the soldiers. That word matters. From this moment, for the next 6 hours, the condemned man belonged to the execution detail. He was theirs, and what they did first was not required by any law. Matthew, Mark, and John all remember it. The whole cohort gathered around him, stripped him, threw a scarlet cloak over his shredded shoulders, and pressed a crown twisted out of thorns onto his head. They put a reed in his hand like a mock scepter, and they knelt in front of him, jeering, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head with it. This was not the sentence. This was sport. The flogging had already come first, the Roman flagrum with its weighted leather thongs, and it had already done such damage that the man could not carry his own crossbeam. So when the procession finally moved out toward the execution ground, the soldiers reached into the crowd and seized a bystander to carry it for him. We even know that man's name, which makes the anonymity of the executioner all the sharper. He was Simon, from Cyrene in North Africa, a pilgrim who had come for the feast and walked into the worst morning of his life. The Romans had a legal right to this, a rule that let a soldier compel any provincial into service on the spot, and they used it on Simon without a second thought. And Mark, writing his gospel a generation later, adds a small strange detail. He names Simon's 2 sons, Alexander and Rufus, as if his first readers might know them, as if to say, "You can go and ask." For one moment, in the machinery of the execution, a real family steps into the frame. Then the machinery grinds on. They reached the place. Golgotha, the Gospels call it, an Aramaic word meaning the place of a skull, a low rise of bare rock just outside the city wall, close enough to a road that everyone passing could read the charge and mock the condemned. And here, at the 3rd hour of the day, around 9 in the morning, the soldier did his work. Mark records the moment in 4 words, almost unbearably plain. And they crucified him. There is no lingering in the Gospels over the nails, no dwelling on the agony, and we will honor that restraint, because the horror of it does not need our embroidery. They lifted the crossbeam with the man fixed to it. They set it into the upright. They secured the feet, and above his head they fastened a board naming his crime, written, John tells us, in 3 languages, so that no one in that international crowd could miss it. The King of the Jews. And then the soldiers did the thing that tells you exactly how routine this was. They sat down at the foot of the cross, and they divided his clothes. This was their right, the recognized perquisite of the execution squad. The condemned man's possessions became the soldier's pay. So they went through the layers of an ordinary Galilean's wardrobe, the outer cloak, the belt, the sandals, and they split them 4 ways among the 4 of them. But the inner tunic was seamless, woven in one piece, too good to tear, and rather than ruin it, they gambled for it, casting lots there on the rock while the man above them was dying. They did not know, could not have known, that they were at that exact moment performing a script written 1,000 years earlier. In the 22nd Psalm, a song of a suffering man, there is a line that says, "They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." John, watching, saw the soldiers' dice game and recognized the psalm. The men closest to the crime, the men with the least idea what they were doing, were the ones who fulfilled the prophecy to the letter. Now lift your eyes from the dice, because this is where the title of this story earns itself. What did the man at the foot of the cross see when he looked up from the ground? He saw, first, that he had not crucified 1 man that morning, but 3. On either side hung a bandit, a rebel, the kind of man Rome nailed up by the dozen. And from his post, the soldier would have heard the strangest exchange. One of the 2 mocked the dying Jesus, spat the same contempt the soldiers had, but the other turned his head and rebuked him, and then said something to the man in the middle, a plea to be remembered. And he heard the answer. "Today," the dying man said, "you will be with me in paradise." Imagine hearing that. You have just nailed up 3 criminals. One of them is promising another one paradise, and the third is looking down at you. The soldier had heard men curse from the cross before. He had heard them scream and beg and rage at Rome and call down every god they knew. He had almost certainly never heard one of them forgive a fellow condemned man his mockery and hand him a kingdom. Whatever was happening on the middle cross did not fit the pattern his whole career had trained into him. And he had 5 more hours to stand in it, because he was also looking down at people the soldier did not expect. Where the execution detail sat gambling, another small group was standing, and they were not jeering. John names them: the mother of Jesus, and her sister, and Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary called the Magdalene. 3 different women, and I want to be careful here, because tradition has spent centuries blurring them into one another, and it is worth keeping them distinct. The mother of Jesus is not the Magdalene. The Magdalene is not Mary of Bethany, and she is not the unnamed sinful woman from an earlier chapter of Luke, whom later legend fused onto her without a shred of textual warrant. They were separate women, standing together at the foot of the cross, and with them stood one young disciple who had not run. And the soldier watched the dying man, with what breath he had left, arrange for his mother's care, giving her to the disciple and the disciple to her. That is what the foot of the cross actually held. Not only nails and dice, but a knot of grieving people who would not leave, in the middle of a crowd that would not stop laughing. And then he heard the words. As they were fixing him to the wood, Luke says, the dying man prayed, not for himself, but for the people driving the nails. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Sit with how precisely that lands on the man we are watching. If anyone on that hill did not know what he was doing, in the fullest and most ordinary sense, it was the auxiliary at the foot of the cross with the mallet still warm in his hand. Those words were spoken over his head, about his hands. We will be honest, the way this channel always is. A few of our oldest copies of Luke do not carry that sentence, and scholars debate whether it stood in the first draft or entered the text very early from living memory. But written or remembered, it is true to that morning. And then, for hours, almost nothing happened. This is the part of a crucifixion the paintings never show, because there is nothing to paint. Crucifixion did not kill quickly. It killed by exhaustion, by the slow failure of a body that could no longer hold itself up to breathe, and it could take a full day or longer. So the soldier's real job, once the nails were in, was to wait, to sit on the rock in the climbing heat, to keep the crowd back, to pass the time, to guard 3 dying men through the long tedium of the late morning. He had done it 100 times. It was the most boring duty in the army, right up until it was not. Because on this particular watch, as the morning wore toward noon, the light began to do something the soldier had no category for. Then, at the 6th hour, the day broke. Not the dawn. It was already midday. Mark says that from the 6th hour to the 9th, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the whole land. The soldier had stood 100 watches under a hard, bright sun, and now the sun failed at the very hour it should have been strongest, and the crowd's laughter would have thinned into something colder. In that darkness, the dying man cried out, in the words of that same 22nd Psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He said he was thirsty, and one of the soldiers, in a last small mockery, lifted the sour wine of their own ration flask to his lips. And near the end he spoke again, words the watch would have heard even over the crowd. "It is finished. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And then a loud cry, and then nothing. Here the ancient texts converge, and here the prophecy stops being a footnote and becomes the whole point. Because the way this man died, the soldiers unknowingly wrote 3 more prophecies into the record with their own hands. That evening, because the Sabbath and the Passover were coming, and the bodies could not remain, orders came to hasten the deaths, and the soldiers went to the 2 bandits and broke their legs, the standard cruelty that ended a crucifixion quickly. But when they came to Jesus in the middle, they found him already dead, and so they did not break his legs. Instead, one soldier, a separate man, not the centurion, drove a spear into his side to be sure. And John, who was standing right there, saw blood and water flow out. And John, reaching back into the scriptures, saw 2 things fulfilled at once. The Passover lamb, the law had commanded, must have no bone broken, and this man's bones were not broken. And the prophet Zechariah, 5 centuries before, had written a line about a day when the people would look on him whom they had pierced. The soldier with the spear thought he was confirming a death. He was signing a prophecy. And here is the turn the whole story rests on. The man being killed was, the Gospels insist, being killed on purpose for the very hands that held the nails, and, they would say, for yours. And there is one more, the one that sits closest to the title of everything we have watched. In that same 22nd psalm, alongside the divided garments, there is a line that in our oldest witnesses reads, "They have pierced my hands and my feet." I will tell you plainly that the Hebrew of that line is debated, and we will not oversell it. But the reading pierced is the one carried by the ancient Greek translation, and by a scroll of the Psalms found by the Dead Sea, older than the Crucifixion itself. Written centuries before anyone in Judea had watched a Roman driving nails, there stood a line about pierced hands and feet. And on that morning, the hands that fulfilled it belonged to a nameless provincial who could not read Hebrew and had never heard of the psalm. Now watch what happened to him. Because the Gospels give us one last thing, and it is the reason this soldier's story is not simply a story of guilt. When Jesus died, the centurion who commanded the detail, the officer standing across from the cross, watching how this man breathed his last, said aloud, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Luke remembers the words slightly differently, as a declaration that the man was innocent, that he was righteous, and we keep both, because the Gospels are not embarrassed to remember a moment from more than one angle. But here is the detail almost everyone misses. Matthew does not give that awe to the officer alone. He writes that the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, were together filled with terror at what they saw. Those who were with him. That is the execution detail. That is the man with the mallet. Matthew puts the nailer inside the confession. He does not tell us the soldier believed. He does not tell us the soldier said a word, but he tells us that the man who drove the nails was standing close enough in that failing light to be afraid in the same instant that his commander named the man he had just killed the Son of God. What happened next, we can follow for a few more hours, and then the record goes dark. Pilate, when he was told Jesus was already dead, was surprised because crucifixion normally took days, not hours, and Mark tells us he summoned the centurion to confirm it before he would release the body. That is the last official act of the detail. An officer standing in front of the governor, confirming that the King of the Jews was truly dead. Then a wealthy member of the council named Joseph, from a town called Arimathea, took the body down and laid it in his own unused tomb. And the soldiers of the execution squad rolled up the garments that were now their pay, shouldered their tools, and walked back toward the barracks, their shift over, the way you walk home from any long and ugly day of work. We would give a great deal to follow one of them home, to know whether the man with the mallet ate his supper that night, the way he ate it every night, whether he slept, whether the darkness at noon and the cry at 3 stayed with him, or faded by morning into just another execution among hundreds. But the record simply closes. The soldiers step out of the light of history the moment their shift ends and take their secret with them. And this is exactly where the honest story ends and the legends begin. And I want to be very clear about the seam between them. Scripture never tells us the executioner's name. It never tells us what became of him. Centuries later, a tradition arose that fused the confessing centurion and the soldier with the spear into a single figure and gave him a name, Longinus, and a whole story of conversion and martyrdom. It is a moving legend, but it is a legend. It first appears in a text called the Gospel of Nicodemus, written not in the 1st century but in the 4th or 5th, long after every eyewitness was dust, and the name itself seems to have been invented out of the Greek word for the spear. So we will not tell you the soldier repented, because the record doesn't tell us that. We will leave him exactly where the Gospels leave him, a man who felt fear in the dark, and then walked away and vanished from history. What he did with that fear, no one on earth knows. But you are not left where he was left. And that is the strange gift of standing at the foot of the cross through his eyes. Because the point of watching the execution from down here, from the level of the dice and the mallet and the divided clothes, is that it takes away the comfortable distance. It is easy to imagine the crucifixion as something done by monsters, by villains with cruelty in their eyes. But the man who actually drove the nails was not a monster. He was a working man doing a job he had done before, following orders, gambling for a dead man's coat, and going home tired. He was, in the most unsettling way, ordinary. He was, in the most unsettling way, us. And the question the whole scene presses into your chest is not how could they have done it. It is how near I stand to the man with the hammer, not in cruelty, but in the ordinary, unexamined obedience that never stops to ask what it is doing. And notice how the story refuses to let you off with mere sympathy for him. It does not ask you to pity a brute from a crueler age. It asks you to recognize him, because the machinery that put Jesus on that cross did not run on exceptional evil. It ran on ordinary people, each doing their small assigned part, and no more. A governor washing his hands of a decision, a priest protecting an institution, a crowd swept along by the shout of the moment, and a soldier drawing his pay. Not one of them thought of himself as the villain. Every one of them had a reason, and the reason was almost always that it was simply their job, or their duty, or what everyone else was doing. That is the uncomfortable mirror at the foot of the cross. The evil that killed Jesus looked up close exactly like a normal Friday. And over those very hands, if the prayer stands, the dying man had already said the only words that could reach them. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Not forgive the pious or the innocent or the ones who understood. Forgive them, the ones at the foot of the cross with blood on their hands, the ones who did not know. That prayer was aimed low, at the ground, at the men doing the killing. And the entire claim of the Christian story is that the distance between the executioner and the worshiper, the distance between the man with the mallet and the man who calls Jesus the Son of God, is a distance that can be crossed. Matthew shows us it can be crossed in an afternoon, because he puts the guards inside the awe. Whether the nailer ever crossed it, we are not told. Whether you will is still open. So I will leave you where those soldiers stood, looking up. There is a line in the prophet Zechariah, the one the spear fulfilled, and it does not end with the piercing. It says they will look on him whom they have pierced, and they will mourn. You have now stood at the foot of the cross for the length of this story. You have seen what the soldier saw, the dice and the darkness, the women who would not leave and the thief who was promised paradise, the sky that failed and the man who forgave the hands that held the nails. The soldier looked up and felt fear and walked away. The prophet says there is another way to look. So let me ask you the question the whole day has been building toward. And it is a different question than the one I asked before. If you had been standing there at the foot of the cross, in the dark, with the sound of that last cry still in the air, what do you think you would have done? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read them, and I will read yours. If this story has done for you even a little of what it has done for me, if it has taken something you thought you knew and let you stand inside it, then subscribe and stay with us, because we are walking through the first century one witness at a time, and there are more of these you will not want to miss. And if there is someone in your life who needs to stand at the foot of the cross today, someone carrying a guilt they think is too ordinary or too old to be forgiven, share this with them now. The prayer that morning was aimed at exactly them.